floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse suite at St. Catherine's Medical Center, each droplet catching the harsh fluorescent light that bathed Marcus Blackstone's gaunt face in an unforgiving glow. At 67, the tech mogul who had revolutionized 3 industries and amassed a fortune that rivaled small nations now lay tethered to machines that beeped and hummed with mechanical indifference. His empire, built on algorithms that could predict human behavior with frightening accuracy, seemed powerless against the mysterious illness that had reduced him from a commanding giant of industry to a withering shadow beneath sterile white sheets. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, chief of internal medicine and the 15th specialist to examine Blackstone in as many weeks, stood at the foot of his bed with a tablet clutched against her chest like armor. Her usually confident demeanor had cracked under the weight of repeated failures, each negative test result and ineffective treatment adding another line of exhaustion to her face. Behind her, a small army of the world's most renowned physicians whispered among themselves, their voices creating a low murmur that mixed with the steady rhythm of the heart monitor. "Mr. Blackstone," Dr. Hartwell began, her voice carefully modulated to project confidence she no longer felt. "We've completed the latest round of genetic sequencing, and while we've identified several interesting markers—" "Interesting?" Blackstone's voice cut through her professional platitudes like a rusty blade. Despite his weakened condition, his eyes still held the fierce intelligence that had allowed him to outmaneuver competitors and reshape entire markets. "I didn't build Blackstone Industries by finding things interesting, Doctor. I built it by solving problems that others deemed impossible." The billionaire's fingers, once capable of typing code for 18 hours straight, now trembled as he gestured toward the wall of monitors displaying his declining vitals. "Look at those numbers. My white blood cell count is dropping faster than my stock price after the quarterly earnings call. My immune system is shutting down like a computer with a virus, and none of you brilliant minds can tell me why." Dr. Hartwell exchanged glances with her colleagues, each of them carrying the weight of their professional reputations. They had run every test known to medical science, consulted with specialists from Tokyo to Stockholm, and even collaborated with researchers at the CDC who suspected they might be dealing with an entirely new pathogen. Yet Blackstone's condition continued to deteriorate at an alarming pace, defying every treatment protocol and stumping even the most experimental approaches. "The symptoms are unlike anything we've encountered," admitted Dr. Friedrich Weber, a German immunologist who had flown in specifically for this case. "The rapid cellular degradation, combined with the selective targeting of your immune system, suggests something we haven't seen before. It's almost as if your body is being attacked by something that knows exactly how to disable your natural defenses." Blackstone let out a bitter laugh that dissolved into a coughing fit, flecks of blood staining the oxygen mask that covered his nose and mouth. When the spasm passed, he fixed each doctor with a withering stare that had once made Fortune 500 CEOs squirm in boardroom chairs. "So, let me understand this correctly," he wheezed, his voice gaining strength from his rising anger. "You're telling me that I can create an AI that can diagnose rare diseases from a simple photo, engineer quantum computers that can solve problems in seconds that would take classical computers millennia, and develop biotechnology that can literally edit the human genome, but I can't cure whatever is eating me alive from the inside?" The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the mechanical sounds of the life support systems that had become Blackstone's constant companions. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the windows, and somewhere in the distance, lightning illuminated the sprawling cityscape where millions of people were going about their lives, blissfully unaware that one of the most powerful men in the world was slowly dying in a tower high above them. Dr. Sarah Chen, a young resident who had been quietly observing from the corner, stepped forward hesitantly. Her movement caught Blackstone's attention, and he turned his penetrating gaze toward her. "You have something to add, Dr. Chen," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was just thinking about the pattern of your symptoms. The way your condition affects different Systems in cycles, almost like what? Blackstone demanded, his interest piqued despite his deteriorating state. Dr. Chen glanced nervously at her superiors before continuing. Like it's following some kind of biological rhythm, something environmental perhaps. Have you considered that this might not be a traditional pathogen at all, but rather a reaction to something in your immediate environment? Dr. Hartwell's expression darkened. Dr. Chen, we've tested everything in Mr. Blackstone's living spaces. Air quality, water, food, even his clothing and personal items. There's nothing that could— With respect, Dr. Hartwell, Blackstone interrupted, his voice gaining a note of curiosity that hadn't been there moments before. The young doctor might be on to something. In my experience, the most elegant solutions often come from the most unexpected sources. He turned back to Dr. Chen, his eyes now burning with the intensity that had made him legendary in Silicon Valley. Tell me more about this environmental theory. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to the young resident, who suddenly found herself at the center of a medical mystery that had already claimed months of the billionaire's life and millions of dollars in medical expenses. The weight of the moment pressed down on her shoulders like a physical force, but something in Blackstone's expression, a flicker of hope mixed with desperate determination, gave her the courage to continue. Well, she began, her voice growing stronger with each word. What if we're looking at this all wrong? What if, instead of asking what's attacking your body, we should be asking what your body is missing? Before anyone could respond to Dr. Chen's provocative question, the pristine silence of the medical suite was shattered by an unexpected sound, the high-pitched giggle of a child echoing from the hallway outside. The laughter seemed impossibly out of place in the sterile environment of the hospital's executive floor, where hushed voices and the soft padding of medical personnel were the norm. Dr. Hartwell frowned and moved toward the door, clearly irritated by this breach of the carefully maintained atmosphere. Security should have cleared this entire wing, she muttered, but before she could reach the door, it burst open with a force that sent her stumbling backward. A whirlwind of motion exploded into the room in the form of an 8-year-old girl, with wild, curly red hair that seemed to defy both gravity and any attempt at taming. Her paint-stained overalls and mismatched sneakers, one blue, one purple, marked her as someone who had clearly not received the memo about appropriate hospital attire. Behind her, a frazzled-looking custodian named Miguel Santos rushed in, his mop bucket clattering against the doorframe as he tried to catch up. "Lucy, por favor, niña, you cannot run away like that," Miguel called out in heavily accented English, his face flushed with embarrassment and exertion. "I am so sorry. Doctors, she is my daughter, and the babysitter, she got sick, and I had to bring her to work today. She was supposed to stay in the break room, but she got bored," Lucy finished matter-of-factly, her bright green eyes taking in the room with the fearless curiosity that only children possess. She seemed completely unbothered by the sea of white coats and expensive medical equipment surrounding her. "Daddy, why does that man look so sad? And why does he have so many tubes in his arms?" The medical team stood frozen in shock, their years of training having prepared them for many scenarios, but not for a child's direct and innocent observation cutting through the complexity of their professional deliberations. Marcus Blackstone, who had been preparing to dismiss this interruption with his characteristic ruthlessness, found himself strangely transfixed by the child's unfiltered honesty. "Lucy, we have to go now," Miguel said urgently, reaching for his daughter's hand. "These important doctors are trying to help this gentleman, and we are disturbing them." But Lucy had already approached Blackstone's bedside with the fearless confidence that children often display before the world teaches them to be afraid. She studied his face with the intensity of a scientist examining a particularly interesting specimen, her head tilted to one side like a curious puppy. "You look like my goldfish Mr. Bubbles did before he got better," she announced with the brutal honesty that only children can deliver without malice, all pale and floaty and sad. "But Daddy fixed Mr. Bubbles, so maybe these smart people can fix you too." Dr. Hartwell stepped forward, her professional instinct screaming that this was highly inappropriate. "Mr. Santos, please, this is a sterile environment, and Mr. Blackstone's immune system is severely compromised." "Wait," Blackstone's voice stopped her mid-sentence. Despite his weakened condition, there was something in his tone that commanded attention. He was staring at Lucy with an expression that none of the medical staff had seen before, genuine curiosity mixed with something that might have been amusement. "What exactly did your father do for Mr. Bubbles?" Lucy's face lit up with the joy of someone who had been asked about their favorite subject. "Oh, Mr. Bubbles was swimming all weird and wouldn't eat his food, and his colors were all wrong. Daddy," said the pet store man, told him it was probably some fancy fish disease with a really long name that I can't remember. "But then, I noticed something." She paused dramatically, clearly relishing having such an attentive audience. Miguel looked mortified, but something in Blackstone's expression kept him from interrupting his daughter's story. "What did you notice?" Blackstone asked, and for the first time in months there was genuine engagement in his voice rather than the bitter resignation that had colored his interactions with the medical staff. "The water looked clean, but it smelled funny," Lucy continued, bouncing slightly on her toes with excitement. "Not bad funny, just different. Like when Mama used to clean with those special soaps that made everything smell like flowers but also made my nose tickle. So, I told Daddy maybe Mr. Bubbles didn't like the clean smell." Dr. Chen stepped forward, her scientific mind immediately grasping the implications of what the child was describing. "You thought the cleaning products were affecting the fish?" "Uh-huh. Daddy thought I was being silly, but he loves me, so he got a new tank and put Mr. Bubbles in water that was just water. No special cleaners or fancy treatments or anything. Just regular old water like he would find in a pond or something." Lucy's smile was radiant as she delivered the conclusion to her story. "And guess what? Mr. Bubbles got all better. His colors came back and he started swimming normal and eating. Again." The room fell into a profound silence as the implications of Lucy's simple observation began to sink in. Dr. Weber was the first to speak, his German accent making his words sound even more precise than usual. "Mein Gott," he whispered. Could it be that simple? Blackstone's eyes had taken on the sharp focus that had made him legendary in the tech world. "Dr. Chen," he said urgently, "your theory about environmental factors. What if it's not something toxic that's been introduced, but rather something essential that's been removed?" Dr. Hartwell looked confused, but Dr. Chen's face was already lighting up with understanding. "The sterilization protocols," she breathed. "Mr. Blackstone, you've been in sterile environments for months. First your private medical facility, then here. Everything you've touched, breathed, consumed has been sterilized, purified, filtered, like Mr. Bubbles' tank," Lucy added helpfully, completely oblivious to the revolutionary moment she had just catalyzed. Miguel finally found his voice, though it shook with emotion. "Lucy, mi amor, I think you might have just helped this nice man very much." Blackstone was already reaching for the call button with trembling fingers, his mind racing with possibilities. "Dr. Chen, I want you to run a complete microbiome analysis immediately. Check my gut bacteria, skin flora, everything, and I want a comparison with baseline samples from before I got sick." "Sir," Dr. Hartwell protested, "that's going to take days, and your condition will continue to deteriorate while we wait. For your traditional approaches to miraculously succeed," Blackstone cut her off, his voice gaining strength from renewed hope. "But this child has given us something none of your expensive consultants could provide. A fresh perspective uncontaminated by medical orthodoxy." He turned to Lucy, who was now examining one of the monitors with fascination, completely unaware that she had just accomplished what teams of world-renowned specialists had failed to do for months. "Tell me, Lucy," Blackstone said gently, "what would you do if you were Mr. Bubbles and you had been in clean water for too long?" Lucy's eyes widened with delight at being asked for her expert opinion on fish care, completely unaware that her answer might determine the fate of one of the world's most powerful men. She climbed onto the chair beside Blackstone's bed with the casual confidence of someone who had never learned that billionaires were supposed to be intimidating. "Well," she said thoughtfully, swinging her legs as she considered the question, with the seriousness it deserved. "First, I would want to go swimming in a real pond with all the good bacteria and little creatures that fish are supposed to have. But Daddy says I can't put Mr. Bubbles in the pond at the park because he might get eaten by bigger fish or get too cold." She paused, her face scrunching up in concentration. "So, instead, we got some water from the pond and mixed it with his clean water, just a little bit at first. And we got some of that good mud from the bottom. Daddy called it substrate, and put just a tiny amount in his tank. Then we waited to see if Mr. Bubbles liked it." Dr. Chen was frantically taking notes, her medical mind translating Lucy's simple observations into complex scientific concepts. "You gradually introduced natural microorganisms back into his environment," she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. "The child is describing a controlled recolonization of beneficial microbes," Dr. Weber added, his excitement barely contained. "It's brilliant in its simplicity." But Dr. Hartwell was shaking her head vigorously, her face pale with concern. "This is absolutely insane, Mr. Blackstone. You're talking about deliberately introducing potentially harmful organisms into your system when your immune function is already compromised. The risk of sepsis alone is outweighed by the certainty of death if we continue on our current path," Blackstone interrupted, his voice carrying the decisive tone that had built his empire. But then his expression softened as he looked at Lucy, who was watching this adult disagreement with the patient interest of someone observing a nature documentary. "However," he continued, "I didn't build Blackstone Industries by making reckless decisions. Lucy, you said you added the pond water gradually. How gradually?" Lucy held up her small hand and pinched her thumb and forefinger together until they were almost touching. "Just this much at first. Daddy used one of those little medicine droppers like when I have to take vitamins when I'm sick. We put in just a few drops, and then we watched Mr. Bubbles for a whole day to see if he got sicker or better." "And what happened?" Blackstone asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer from the radiant smile spreading across Lucy's face. "He got a little bit better. Not all the way better, but his fins weren't so droopy, and he swam around a little bit more. So the next day, Daddy let me add a few more drops. We did that for a whole week, adding just a tiny bit more each day, until Mr. Bubbles was swimming around like he was dancing." Miguel, who had been standing in mortified silence during this entire exchange, finally found his voice. "She is telling the truth," he said quietly. "I thought it was foolish, but my Lucy, she has always been, how do you say, intuitive with living things. The fish, it did get better, exactly as she describes." Dr. Chen looked up from her notes, her eyes bright with possibility. "Mr. Blackstone, what Lucy is describing is essentially a controlled microbial reintroduction protocol. It's not unprecedented. We use similar approaches with patients who've had their gut microbiomes destroyed by intensive antibiotic treatments. But those are carefully cultured, laboratory-controlled organisms," Dr. Hartwell protested. "Not pond water." "Actually," Dr. Weber interjected thoughtfully, "there is precedent for this approach. In Germany, we have been experimenting with environmental microbiome restoration for patients with certain autoimmune conditions. The theory is that our modern obsession with sterility may be creating immune systems that don't know how to function properly." Blackstone was quiet for a long moment, his sharp mind processing the information with the same analytical rigor he had once applied to market analyses and product development strategies. The room held its collective breath as they waited for his decision. "Here's what we're going to do," he finally announced, his voice carrying the authority that had commanded boardrooms and shaped industries. "Dr. Chen, I want you to design a protocol based on Lucy's fish cure, but with appropriate medical safeguards. Start with microbiome samples from healthy individuals, My own pre-illness samples if we have them stored anywhere, or donors with similar genetic profiles. He turned to Dr. Hartwell, whose expression suggested she was witnessing the end of medical civilization as she knew it. Doctor, I appreciate your concerns, and they're not unfounded, but I've spent my entire career betting on unconventional solutions when conventional wisdom failed. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over while expecting different results. But the liability, Dr. Hartwell began, will be entirely mine, Blackstone cut her off. I'll sign whatever waivers are necessary. If this kills me, it kills me faster than whatever is eating me alive right now. If it works. He looked at Lucy, who was now humming softly to herself while examining the various medical devices with scientific curiosity. If it works, then a child's wisdom will have succeeded where the combined knowledge of the world's medical establishments failed. Dr. Chen was already moving toward the door, her mind racing with protocols and procedures. I'll need to contact the microbiology lab immediately. We can start with fecal microbiota transplantation. It's an established procedure for certain conditions, but we'll need to expand it to include skin and respiratory microbiomes as well. How long? Blackstone asked. If we work through the night, we could have the first treatment ready by morning. But Mr. Blackstone, I have to emphasize that this is highly experimental. We'll be essentially flying blind. Lucy looked up from the machine she had been examining. Flying is fun, she said matter-of-factly. Mr. Bubbles looked like he was flying when he got better, swimming all around his tank like he had wings. Something in her innocent observation struck Blackstone profoundly. For months he had been grounded, tethered to machines and protocols, and the weight of his own mortality. The idea of flying, of taking a leap into the unknown based on a child's simple wisdom, suddenly seemed like the most natural thing in the world. Then let's learn to fly, he said quietly. Dr. Chen, proceed with your protocol. And Lucy? He turned to the little girl who looked at him with the same bright curiosity she had shown his medical equipment. Would you like to stay and help me get better? I think I might need an expert on fish care to make sure we're doing this right. Lucy's face lit up like a Christmas morning. Really? Can I, Daddy? Can I help the sick man get better like Mr. Bubbles? Miguel looked overwhelmed, caught between his daughter's joy and the magnitude of what was happening. Senor Blackstone, you don't understand. I am just a custodian. My daughter, she is just a child who loves animals. We are not important people. Blackstone's expression grew serious, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made everyone in the room understand they were witnessing something profound. Miguel, in the last 6 months, I've had consultations with Nobel Prize winners, department heads from the world's most prestigious medical institutions, and researchers who have devoted their lives to understanding the human body. None of them could see what your daughter saw in 5 minutes. He looked at Lucy, who was now drawing pictures on the condensation of the window. Important people are just people who happen to be important. Smart people are the ones who can see simple truths that others miss. Your daughter isn't just a child who loves animals. She's a genius disguised as an 8-year-old. The storm outside was beginning to subside, and the first tentative rays of sunlight were breaking through the clouds, casting everything in a golden light that seemed to promise new beginnings. As Dr. Chen hurried out to begin preparing what would become known as the Lucy Protocol, and Dr. Hartwell reluctantly agreed to oversee the unprecedented treatment, Marcus Blackstone felt something he hadn't experienced in months: hope. But as the excitement of the moment began to settle, none of them could have predicted the profound complications that would arise when the world's media discovered that a billionaire's life had been saved by a custodian's daughter, or the lengths that certain people would go to suppress a cure that threatened entire medical establishments. 3 weeks later, the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Marcus Blackstone sat in his penthouse office overlooking the city, His color returned and his eyes bright with the vitality that had once made him a force of nature in the business world. The Lucy Protocol, as it had been officially designated, in the medical journals already clamoring to document the unprecedented treatment, had worked beyond anyone's wildest expectations. But success, Blackstone was learning, came with complications he hadn't anticipated. Lucy Santos perched on the edge of his massive mahogany desk, her legs swinging freely as she carefully arranged the latest batch of get-well cards from around the world. Her small hands moved with deliberate precision, sorting the mail by country of origin, a system she had devised entirely on her own. In the 3 weeks since she had become an unofficial consultant on Blackstone's recovery, she had transformed. From a custodian's daughter into something approaching a celebrity, though she seemed blissfully unaware of her newfound fame. "Mr. Marcus," she said, using the name she had bestowed upon him despite his repeated invitations to call him anything else, "this letter is from a little boy in Japan whose goldfish is sick. He wants to know if the droplet method works on fish with spots." She held up a colorful drawing of what appeared to be a very sad fish covered in polka dots. Blackstone smiled, something that still felt foreign after months of grimness. "What do you think we should tell him, Dr. Lucy?" She giggled at the title he had started using, though she took her responsibilities with surprising seriousness. "I think we should tell him that all fish are different, just like people. But sometimes, when something isn't working, you have to try something new, even if the grown-ups think it's silly." From across the room, Miguel Santos looked up from where he was meticulously cleaning the already pristine windows, his face a complex mixture of pride and overwhelming anxiety. The past 3 weeks had turned his simple life upside down. His daughter was now regularly consulted by medical professionals. His own custodial work had been elevated to environmental maintenance specialist, with a salary that made him dizzy, and reporters seemed to lurk around every corner, desperate for interviews about the miracle cure. But it was the phone call he had received that morning that had him truly worried, a call from someone claiming to represent a consortium of pharmaceutical companies who were concerned about the implications of the Lucy Protocol and wanted to discuss the situation with him privately. "Lucy, mi amor," Miguel called softly. "Perhaps we should go home now. Mr. Blackstone needs his rest, and you have school tomorrow." Before Lucy could respond, the office door burst open with a force that sent Miguel's cleaning supplies scattering across the floor. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell stood in the doorway, her usually composed demeanor shattered, clutching a tablet against her chest like a shield. Behind her, 2 men in expensive suits followed with the predatory confidence of sharks sensing blood in the water. "Mr. Blackstone," Dr. Hartwell said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic, "we need to talk, immediately and privately." Her eyes darted meaningfully toward Lucy, who had stopped sorting mail and was watching the adults with the keen interest of someone who had learned that grown-up conversations often contained important information. "Anything you need to discuss can be said in front of my consultants," Blackstone replied coolly, gesturing toward Lucy and Miguel. The past 3 weeks had taught him to trust his instincts about people, and everything about these unexpected visitors screamed danger. The taller of the 2 suited men stepped forward, his smile as artificial as his perfectly capped teeth. "Mr. Blackstone, I'm Richard Pemberton from Pemberton, Wakefield and Associates. We represent several major pharmaceutical companies who are concerned about the medical precedent being set by your recent treatment." Lucy looked up from her cards, her young mind immediately grasping something the adults were trying to hide. "Why are they talking like the mean kids at school who want to take your lunch money?" she asked with devastating directness. Pemberton's smile faltered slightly. "Perhaps the child should—" "The child," Blackstone interrupted, his voice carrying the steel that had once intimidated entire boardrooms, "is the reason I'm alive. She stays." He stood slowly, his recovered strength evident in every movement. Now what exactly are your concerns? Dr. Hartwell stepped forward, her tablet extended like evidence in a criminal trial. Marcus, they're saying the Lucy protocol is too dangerous to be released to the general public, that it could cause massive outbreaks of antibiotic-resistant infections if people start trying to replicate it without proper medical supervision. They're also concerned, added the second suit, a thin man whose voice carried the precision of a lawyer, about the potential economic disruption to established treatment protocols. The pharmaceutical industry employs millions of people worldwide. If simple environmental modifications can replace complex drug therapies, Lucy slid off the desk and walked over to stand beside her father, her small hand slipping into his much larger one. But her eyes never left the two strangers, and there was something in her expression that reminded Blackstone of a lioness protecting her cubs. "You're scared," she said simply, her child's honesty cutting through layers of corporate doublespeak. "You're scared that if people know fish water can make people better, they won't buy your expensive medicine anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. Pemberton's face had gone an alarming shade of red, while his companion looked like he had been slapped. Dr. Hartwell was staring at Lucy with something approaching awe, and Miguel's grip on his daughter's hand had tightened protectively. Blackstone felt a familiar rush of adrenaline, the same feeling he had experienced in his early days when established competitors had tried to crush his innovative ideas before they could gain traction. But this time, the stakes weren't just his fortune or his company's future. This time, it was about something far more valuable: the right of people to access simple, effective treatments regardless of their ability to pay for complex medical interventions. "Gentlemen," Blackstone said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had once reshuffled entire industries. "I think you've misunderstood something fundamental about who you're dealing with. I didn't build my fortune by backing down from bullies, and I certainly didn't survive near death to be intimidated by corporate lawyers." He moved to stand behind Lucy, his hands resting protectively on her shoulders. "This little girl saw something that your entire medical industrial complex missed. She saved my life with wisdom so simple that it could fit in a children's book. And now you want to suppress that knowledge because it threatens your profit margins?" Pemberton's artificial smile had completely disappeared, replaced by something much uglier. "Mr. Blackstone, I don't think you fully grasp the situation. The medical establishment has protocols for a reason. Public safety regulations exist to protect people from dangerous experimental treatments. We're simply trying to ensure that proper procedures are followed." By silencing an 8-year-old? Miguel spoke for the first time, his accented English, carrying a strength that surprised everyone in the room, including himself. "By trying to make people forget that sometimes the simplest answers are the right ones?" Lucy looked up at her father with pride, then turned back to the two lawyers with the fearless gaze that had first captivated Blackstone weeks earlier. "My teacher says that when people try to keep you from sharing good things, it's usually because they're worried about losing something bad they have." The profound wisdom of her observation hit the room like a physical force. Even Dr. Hartwell, who had initially supported the concerns about the protocol's safety, was beginning to see the larger implications of what was happening. Blackstone felt something crystallizing in his mind, a decision that would change not just his own life, but potentially millions of others. He had spent decades building an empire based on innovation and disruption. Now, faced with his greatest challenge yet, he realized that his true legacy wouldn't be measured in dollars or market share, but in whether he had the courage to fight for a truth so simple that a child could understand it. "Lucy," he said quietly, "what do you think we should do?" She considered the question with the same serious concentration she had given to Mr. Bubbles's treatment. "I think," she said finally, "we should tell everyone about the fish cure, because if it helped Mr. Bubbles and it helped you, maybe it can help other people too. And that would be good, wouldn't it?" The battle lines were drawn. On one side stood the established medical-pharmaceutical complex with its vast resources and institutional power. On the other stood a recovering billionaire, a custodian, and an 8-year-old girl with an unshakable belief in the power of simple truths. As Pemberton and his associate exchanged ominous glances and Dr. Hartwell struggled with her conflicted loyalties, Marcus Blackstone made a decision that would transform him from a tech mogul into something far more dangerous to the status quo, a man with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The storm outside had passed, but inside, the penthouse office, a much larger tempest was just beginning to brew.